On Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court began hearing arguments on whether cities can criminalize unhoused people for simply existing. Now, this case centers around some pretty terrible regulations that were enacted in the city of Grants Pass, Oregon, which these ordinances were designed to punish poor people, homeless people, for simply being poor and unhoused, to get them to essentially leave. And that's exactly what the people who crafted these legislations had admitted their goal was, just to get them to leave. So now the punishments for being unhoused and sleeping in public parks were fines of hundreds of dollars, which if you're homeless, you're not actually going to be able to afford it. And then jail time, staying in jail for 30 days. So now look, this is after, of course, unhoused people, due to the inability to find affordable housing, began sleeping in public parks. Obviously, people complained. The city decided to crack down on it. And as I mentioned, crack down pretty harshly. So, look, here's the thing. Do they really think that finding people who can't afford a place to sleep is going to help them? No. No, that's not going to help them. And again, that's not the point. The point is to get them to leave. And so here's the thing, right? In 2022, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals cracked down on it. They said that these laws enacted were in a violation of the Eighth Amendment, which is against the cruel and unusual punishment. So that lower court decision was correct. That said, the city decided to take it to the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court already looks to be siding with the city in cracking down on homelessness, on the unhoused specifically. That's not good. That's not good. So now they argue, of course, that, well, you know, they got problems. It's their personal problems, and it's their conduct. You know, I mean, sleeping outside. It's just terrible conduct. We don't want them. We don't want to encourage them to do this thing. Well, now wait a minute. You kind of have to sleep. You're biologically wired to have to sleep, and so calling that conduct that they want to crack down on, they want to discourage. It's like telling someone not to breathe. In fact, Justice Kagan actually had brought that point up. Let me find the quote here. She said, "You could say that breathing is conduct too, but presumably you would not think that it's okay to criminalize breathing in public. And for a homeless person who has no place to go, sleeping in public is kind of like breathing in public." And you wouldn't think of cracking down on people who are breathing in public, right? And so calling it an act of conduct is absolutely ridiculous. Look, we know the reason that they don't want homeless people around, because it reminds them of their own failures to provide good jobs, housing, affordable housing. And so this reminder, got to get rid of it. Can't have it. Can't have it around.
Can't let that happen.
Get them out of here, because I don't actually want to solve the problem. We don't have the will to solve the problem. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who live in the communities that also don't have the will to solve the problem. They just want it gone. They just want it gone. So here's the thing, okay? Obviously, not every homeless person is a bad person. I know, it's a crazy thing that I have to remind people that, hey, homeless people aren't bad. I know. Insane, right? Not every one of them has addiction. Not everyone is mentally ill, you know, and not every one of them is lazy. Again, these are facts, and I can't believe I have to go and point that out, that their situation is not a result of poor moral fiber or character. But here we are. I have to point this out. In fact, you know, a lot of the unhoused, they work and are good people. In fact, a 2021 study from the University of Chicago estimated that 53% of people living in homeless shelters and 40% of unsheltered people were employed either full or part-time in the year that the people were observed homeless between the years of 2011 and 2018. Huh. Wait a minute. So 40% of the people that were living out on the street, not just in the shelters, but on the street, work either full or part-time. Why don't they have homes? It's because they can't afford it. They can't afford it. Findings from the University of Chicago study also found that the mean annual earnings for people experiencing sheltered homelessness aged 18 to 64 was $8,169 in 2015. That's pre-tax income and excludes benefits that they might be entitled to. Mean earnings for unsheltered people were even lower at $6,934 in 2015 and have generally stayed lower than their sheltered counterparts during the 10-year frame of study. So they make, again, people who are unsheltered, out on the street, make $6,934 a year. Whereas if you're sheltered, $8,169. Now, how much does it take to have a home? The National Low-Income Housing Coalition's Out of Reach report calculated that a household would need to earn an average salary of $46,964 or $23 an hour to afford a two-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. Accounting for inflation, even the top earners in both of those groups could not afford a one- or two-bedroom apartment in 2022, which are $44,200 and $53,706 respectively. Gee, no wonder people are sleeping out in the park in a tent because that's all they can afford. You could have a job, you could work full or part-time and still can't afford to live. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, and there are states where you don't make that, where you make just above that, where you make sometimes $10, $11 an hour. You need $23 an hour to live in some of these places to get a one or two bedroom apartment. Either you have a family where you're both working, for $8 an hour or whatever, 8 to 11, or if you're one person and you're working at, McDonald's, whatever, you're making $15 an hour. Think that's enough? Yep, still can't afford a home. And there it is. And there it is. And by the way, getting back to that shelter, right? You might think, well, okay, so you can live in a shelter and then you just get a job and you can save up, right? No, this shelter specifically in Grants Pass is, again, religious transitional housing that compels participants to work full-time without pay and limits you to staying for a month. What? Not only that, but as I mentioned before, the town president of Grants Pass admitted that the purpose of these new laws was to make homeless people uncomfortable so that they would leave, passing the buck to someone else. Now, getting back to, by the way, the reasons for people that are, the reasons that people have for being unhoused. Again, we talked about how unaffordable housing is, okay, and places that don't actually have a municipal shelter or any municipal shelters, just private charity, but also the inability to be able to get a job. For example, if you lost your job and you became homeless, you lost your home, lost your place to live, guess what? You're going to have discrimination against you if you don't have a permanent address. You might also have issues prepping for interviews, because where are you going to take a shower at, right? Where are you going to comb your hair? Where are you going to shave and make sure you're presentable? You can't really do that. You might not have reliable transportation, too. You might have to have a work requirement, a work accommodation to do your job successfully. You see, there's one of the reasons that people do become homeless as well is because of disability. People can work with disability, but often need accommodation. And sometimes employers are not always willing to give those accommodations. So it makes it very difficult for you to find a job that pays well enough for you to be able to afford a place to live. And of course, for government housing, government subsidized housing, there are massive wait lists for people. Not only that, but combine all of that with how long it might take to get a disability claim approved if you can't work. And think about all the bills that pile up while you're waiting for that decision. It could take years for a disability claim. And disability claims, look, they're very, very difficult to prove. All right. And so you get all that piles up. And guess what? Very likely you could become homeless. There are also educational requirements that can impede people who are, from being able to get a job who is currently or has formerly experienced homelessness. So there are a lot of barriers to getting out of homelessness once you experience it. And most people are one bad paycheck away, or one bad experience, one cancer diagnosis away from losing everything. Now, look, affordable housing obviously is something that we need. Something can be very, very helpful. The only problem is a lot of cities don't want to fund it. Residents don't want to live near it. They're worried about their property values. And I can understand that. I can understand worrying about your property value, because if you're lucky enough to buy a home, you want to protect the value of your investment, of course. And it's because it's one of the only ways left in this country to build wealth for the average American family. So if you're worried about your property values, I get it. At the same time, though, there are people out there suffering without a place to live because the housing is out of reach because it's too expensive for people to live. And that is something that is a major problem that you can't just shove under the rug. You can't just ignore it, and you can't just be worried about your property value over the lives of these people. It seems like the only solution to this problem from our governments, from their perspective, they believe that the only solution is to just criminalize them and shuffle them around, sweep them out, out of the way, get them out of here, out of sight, out of mind. Get them into one city or, another city, or put them in one jail cell to another, maybe hire them out to private prisons, put them in the private prison cells so we can make some money off of them. Or I should say the corporations can make some money off of them, and taxpayers can still spend a whole bunch of money on the issue, because guess what? These private prison corporations, they don't imprison people for free. They have a whole business model that ends up taking a lot of taxpayer money. And if they're not taking taxpayer money, then they are using these people that are in these private prisons and basically working them for free, these corporations pocketing that money. And here you have a source of cheap, very cheap labor. That's just, that their only crime was being poor. So that's the issue, okay? Now, I want to go to Kelsey Corcoran, who's a lawyer who's arguing against the ban. She made a fantastic case. Unfortunately, she is going against a court that is massively conservative and hates homeless people. But nonetheless, she is making a lot of good arguments here. She says, quote, "The ordinance is by design to make it physically impossible for homeless people to live in Grants Pass without facing endless fines and jail time." Corcoran added that the bans turns the city's homeless problem to someone else's problem by forcing its homeless residents into other jurisdictions. And not only that, but she argues that this violates the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment and punishing people for poverty. Now, the other side's lawyer, Theon Evangelis, a lawyer for Grants Pass, defended the city's punishment as, quote, "not in any way unusual." Wait a minute. Just because it's not unusual doesn't make what they're doing in Grants Pass right. She said, "The court should reverse and end the Ninth Circuit's failed experiment," referring to the appellate court which in 2022 blocked the city's regulations. She claimed the ruling had fueled the spread of the encampments while harming those it purports to protect. Wait, you don't care about protecting the unhoused. Who are you protecting? You're protecting the investors. That's what you're doing. Claiming to protect taxpayers as well, but as I just mentioned, sweeping them out or putting them in private prisons, that still costs the taxpayer money. In fact, it costs more money to criminalize homelessness than it does to actually ensure that they have places to live. It's amazing. As I said, Grants Pass has a private charity, and so no wonder people are going to the park. Look, jailing and fining these people is not helping them. That's it. They need homes. They need homes. They need a place to sleep. That's it. We have to sleep or we literally die. We have to have food or we literally die. We have to have shelter, okay, or we die. It's really simple. You have to ensure that every one of your citizens has those things. Sleeping, eating, using the bathroom. By the way, I know there's a lot of people that complain, they're peeing on the street, they're pooping on the sidewalk. Yeah, where else do you expect them to go? I don't like it. Nobody likes it. I'm pretty sure they don't like it. But where else are they supposed to go? What else are they supposed to do? These are all biological necessities that get gatekept. I mean, think about it, right? A lot of people do not understand what homeless people go through in their day-to-day life, just to do the basic things that you and I take for granted. I mean, think about it, right? Where are you supposed to go if you're a homeless person and you got to go to the bathroom? Oh, just go to the store. You just go into the local Walmart. They'll use their bathrooms, right? It's possible. I mean, certainly you and I could go in there and just use the bathroom without a problem, right? But imagine, what do you think would happen if a very obviously homeless person walks into that store? Do you think they're going to be welcomed in? When nobody knows that if they're going to be able to spend any money because they don't have any money. And so it's very obvious, that they're not going to come in and spend money. They're just going to use the bathroom. What do you think is going to happen? Probably going to get kicked out. That's it. I mean, there are places where if you want to use the bathroom, you're required to buy something. You think a homeless person's going to do that? And that's the problem. We treat homeless people terribly. And it's because a lot of us do not understand what they go through. And not only that, but we make value judgments based on them, moral judgments on them. They must be lazy. They must have, they must have deserved it. They must want to be in that situation. I don't believe it. Look, homelessness is not a simple problem. It's not a simple solution, obviously. A lot of factors involved in solving this crisis, but the overall goal here should be something that we all should agree with, that every human being have the basics to survive. It's simple: a place to sleep, food to eat, clean water. That's it. It's not difficult to do. We could do this if we really wanted to, which means that the only reason we're not doing it is because we don't want to as a society. But as I mentioned, the conservative majority in this case is not going to see that. It hardly looks like they're going to line up behind Grants Pass and obliterate the Eighth Amendment, which again protects against cruel and unusual treatment, in this case, towards the unhoused. But if that gets weakened any further, it's going to go beyond the unhoused. It's going to continue to, affect people who are in poverty and who are barely hanging on, barely making it, allowing governments to essentially criminalize poverty. And that is a direction that I do not want to see this country go into.